want to welcome you all. Oasis has put together this session. I'm facilitating. The session is called Managing Money and Debt. So thank you for joining us. My name is Roland Chiwatelu. I am a financial wellness consultant with Eckler. Oasis selected Eckler to provide and to collaborate with this support for Oasis members. Eckler is independent from Oasis. We are financial wellness experts, and we do have considerable expertise and experience in delivering similar programs to other employers around the country. So what we are going to be covering today, we're going to be talking about um, really how to arm yourself and give yourself the best tools and opportunities to meet your goals and to continue to manage your money. And also, if you have debt, to pay down your debt, and also to avoid getting into a situation where you're accumulating too much debt. So we're going to start off with, where we think most people should be starting their planning, which is basically assessing where they are today. And so add up your assets, your debts, and take a look at your financial picture. So we're going to look at that, the net worth statement. And so once you're able to assess your current financial position, I think it then becomes easier to start to set goals for yourself because you're aware of sort of the realistic and achievable goals that you're able to achieve once you know sort of the lay of the land. And as you march towards your goals, being able to stay on track means being aware of everything that's happening in terms of your cash flow situation. And so we want to talk about how you are able to analyze that and manage your spending so that you're able to live within your means. And that's what the sort of core tenet is what can you do to make sure that you're always staying in a situation where you're not living above your means, but you're living within your means. And now you are able to, if you want to, aggressively go after your goals. And if one of your goals is paying down debt, you're in a good position to do that. So we're going to talk about some strategies and tips involved with all of that. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. We're scheduled until for an hour. And the way we're going to break it down is about 45 minutes or so for the webinar content, and then some Q&A time afterwards. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen, two ways that you can ask questions. There's a Q&A button, and then there's a chat button. And so you can use either of those. The Q&A, I think, allows you to be able to ask questions anonymously if you want to. Whereas the chat, if you use the chat, basically it can go out, everybody can see it. So either way is fine, whatever you're comfortable with. Those of you who are more comfortable maybe using email to ask questions, follow-up questions after our session is done, we're going to show you where and how you can do that. So the last slide will include an email address where you can send any follow-up questions, and I'll do my best to respond to you within 24 hours. So this webinar is being recorded, and it should be up on the resource section of the Oasis website. Today is Tuesday, so it should be up there before the end of the week. Okay, so I want to start off, we're going to be getting into sort of specific tips in terms of managing your money, paying down and staying out of significant debt. But I want to step back and take a look at sort of the lay of the land, see what's going on as we look at, what the average and typical household in Canada is dealing with as we're dealing with this pandemic. And so something that has been interesting to observe is that we, in fact, are seeing quite a significant decrease in the amount of debt that the typical household is carrying, which I think if you would have asked people who are watching the financial well-being of Canadians, if you would have asked people, at the beginning of this year, before the pandemic was sort of front and center in all of our lives, I think we would have anticipated that probably debts would have been higher. You would probably reasonably think that, people would have a difficult time dealing with disruptions to their work, to their income, and thus will be taking on more debt. But in fact, we've seen the opposite happen quite dramatically, actually. So what this reading is showing you is the percentage of debt compared to disposable income. And so when we think of disposable income, it's basically your income after taxes has been taken off your paycheck and all other deductions. And so this is really the money you have left after you've gotten your paycheck, your take-home pay, to be able to pay for your lifestyle. And so when we compare that to the amount of debt people have, the reading most recently is that about people are carrying about $1.58 of debt for every $1 of disposable income, which is quite a big drop from where we were at the beginning of the year, where it was closer to $1.75 of debt for every dollar of disposable income. So wondering what is going on, because as I mentioned, I think many people would have anticipated that household debt would have been going up during the pandemic. And so I think what we've seen is that there's been, unprecedented levels of support from institutions like the federal government, provincial governments, banks and lenders have even stepped in terms of allowing people to defer mortgage payments for a period of time, other debt payments for a period of time. And so all of this support has really given people the means to be able to um, get through this pandemic, and we're still in it, of course, relatively in a decent situation in terms of their financial position. What we don't know, of course, is because we're still in this pandemic, how it's going to continue to play out. Some of these programs have ended. Think of CERB, that has ended. It's now transitioned into EI type of benefits for people who are still seeing disruptions to their income. And then, of course, we have to continue to watch to see how this is going to continue to play out. But we know that at some point, this pandemic will end, hopefully, and things might go back to the underlying trend. And if I could just step back a bit, you could see the underlying trend before the dip this year was that household debt to income was steadily going up and up and up. And so I think that will return once we're out of this pandemic and we're back to sort of a more normal situation. And I guess if we're thinking of these long running trends and what the contributions are to why debt has been increasing in the typical household in this country, well, you can think of a couple reasons. One is probably cost of living, especially as we look at some of the major urban areas in the country. Housing is expensive. Uh, Certainly, I think we have seen stories where rents have been going down recently because of COVID. So maybe once we go back to normal, some of these pressures that are increasing the cost of living will start to show up again. Low interest rates also are an incentive to borrow more money. We've been in a historically low interest rate environment for the better part of the last 5, 10 years, or even some could argue even longer than that. Interest rates have been steadily going down basically since the 80s. And they are basically as low as they can go now, because as a result of the pandemic, the central bank, the Bank of Canada, lowered interest rates right at the beginning in early March, a number of times actually. And so with lower interest rates, borrowing costs are cheaper, it's easier to borrow, and usually you see people doing just that. And then of course we think about the pressure that we feel to sort of keep up the lifestyle that maybe our neighbors and our peers are seeming to have. And so those are some of the reasons why I think we might see a return to increasing household debt compared to income. Now, certainly I think we want to talk about what steps can you take given what's going on now, but also given if we get back to a normal way of life after the pandemic and some of the pressures that we were talking about before, what can you do to manage your money properly? And so that you're able to achieve your goals and you're able to stay out of debt. And if you have debt, be able to pay that off. So first, we want to talk about where you are in terms of financial position. And that tool is essentially the net worth statement. So we're going to look at your net worth in a bit and what to analyze and to evaluate when you are looking at your net worth. But first, I want to highlight something that I think is sometimes we forget, right? Because a question that I often get when I'm dealing with people in a one-on-one situation is they often will ask me, well, how do I compare? How do I measure against other people in my peer group? And this is a reminder that financial planning is very much about your circumstances and your situation in your life, in your career, where you are in sort of that your stages. And so that's why I came up, well, I didn't come up with it, but I like this term of age and stage. It's a reminder that, you know, you are where you are financially because of those circumstances. A lot of it too is your behaviors, of course. So we don't want to let you off the hook there. But if you're young and you're just starting out in your career, you're probably going to have a small net worth, and that's absolutely typical for that stage of life. You may imagine that someone at that stage of life could have student loans, and so they have debt, and they may have nothing in assets, right? Unless they're lucky to get into a housing situation, or maybe start to have some other debts as well. But most people that are young, their net worth is limited or small. But what is an asset for those folks is they have time, right? They have time to pay off debt, manage their savings, grow savings, accumulate assets. And so what we tend to see is that net worth does rise with age. So just keep that in mind, right? And I think for many of us, we dream of one day being able to do whatever we want without any other obligations. So you can call that financial independence. You can call that retiring. I like financial independence because it basically is a really nice way to say, okay, this is about getting to a point in your life when you don't need to work if you don't have to, because you've made good choices and you've saved enough money that you can live off of the income that your retirement savings gives you. And so, what I think, again, many of us have this dream or goal of financial independence, but you need a plan and you need to set a path towards getting there. So now that you're getting income and you're working, so if you look at someone, let's say is averaging $70,000 a year over 20 years, so you're going to take in a bunch of income over that time, so $1.4 million over that period of time. But of course, right, you're taking in income, you're spending some of it too, because you have living expenses, you have family obligations, you have taxes, you have lifestyle expenses, you have debt that you have to repay, which often people do because even to acquire some assets like a car or house, many of us need to get into debt for that. So it's this delicate balance of having income, but also understanding that you are going to be making choices, right? Because you're not a billionaire. None of us on here are Bill Gates, otherwise we wouldn't be on this webinar. And so because you have limited income that's going to be coming in over that period of time, you really have to make wise and smart choices about how you spend your money so that at the end of the day, you can hit financial independence, and you have a plan to do that so that you can get there smoothly, without stress, without drama. And that's what this is all about, right? That's why we want to be talking to you today, to talk about those fundamental, choices that you can make so that you can get to your goals and your destination in a calm, smooth manner. So let's take a look at an example just to sort of personalize this and allow you to maybe see yourself in these examples. So we'll look at this one example. And so this is a young couple. So even if you don't relate exactly to this case, we're still going to use them as a way that all of us could take these basic principles and apply them to our own situation. So we're talking about assessing your current financial position, and that's examining your net worth statement. So here's Winnie and Kelvin. They're examining their net worth. So if you are part of a couple, as in this example, you can feel free to make your update your net worth statement jointly. And so you want to, take note of any assets that you and your spouse both own. Usually, typically, it's like a house. If you own your house, then you and your spouse basically are on title for that in most situations. You may also want to identify assets where it's only in your name, and assets that are only in your spouse's name, like maybe an RSP, for example. And then same thing with debts, right? You want to do the same thing with your debts. If you're single, of course, it's easier. You're just looking at what you have in terms of assets, what you own, and in debts, what you owe. So a few things to pay attention to as you're doing this exercise, right? I think you want to pay attention when we're focusing on your assets. You want to pay attention to where your assets are highly concentrated, meaning what's your biggest asset? What is the asset that dominates your situation? So if we look at this example here with Winnie and Calvin, we see it's their house. And this is typical for Canadian households that own their own home. It's usually that is their biggest asset. And the other thing you want to pay attention to, so even if you're not a homeowner, let's say you rent, for example, where's your biggest asset concentrated in? Could it be in savings? Could it be in your company pension or savings plan? Could it be in your vehicles? Could it be, where is it, right? And so what is the nature of it? Because the other thing you want to assess is something called, I'm going to throw some financial jargon, okay? Liquidity. Liquidity. So what does that mean, right? If a financial asset is liquid, all it means is that that asset can be quickly converted to cash, right? So the more liquid an asset is, the easier and faster it is to turn into cash. So staying with Winnie and Kelvin and their biggest asset, which is their home, what do we know about houses? Can you turn a house into cash very quickly? Some of you, you know, probably have written or read some stories in the media about people, in Vancouver or Toronto or something like that, selling their house within hours. So in that case, yeah, it is very liquid, but usually it takes a lot longer to sell your home, right? Weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. And so we traditionally look at homes, properties, apartments as assets that are not very liquid. So you do want to analyze when you're looking at your assets, which of your assets are very liquid, because guess what? If there's an emergency and you're in a situation where you need to access cash quickly, that's where you're going to turn. So you want to identify those assets and see if you have enough in your emergency funds or enough in those sort of liquid assets that can help you get through an emergency. When we're analyzing our liabilities or your debts, same thing, right? You want to take a look at what your biggest debt is. And then you also want to look at your debts that have the highest borrowing costs. So with all your debts, what you should be doing is taking a look at how much you owe, taking a look at what your monthly payments are on them, and then taking a look at what your interest rate is on those particular debts. Because the debt that has the highest interest rate, so let's take a look at credit cards, for example, those are the areas where you may want to prioritize paying down first. So later on, we're going to talk about how to, a few tips to help you really pay off your debt quickly. Even if you have, different kinds of debt with different interest rates, what's a good strategy to get that paid down? So as I talked about, right, once you're able to assess your situation like that, now you have a good understanding of what your financial position is. Really, that's what the net worth statement tells you, right? What your financial position is at a given point in time. So with that information, now you can actually set realistic, achievable goals for yourself. So I'm going to throw this out to you. This is a question that we're going to throw out to you. We're going to launch a poll here. So you should be seeing it pop up on your screen. By the way, this is anonymous, and so you just pick whichever option you think applies to you. So what are your financial priorities that you're focusing on now? Uh, are you focusing mostly on paying down your debt? Or are you focusing mostly on saving? Or is there some other goal that you have that you're primarily focused on? So even though you may have all a combination of these, we'll want you to tell us what your number one focus is. And so 90% of you voted, and take a look at that. So the majority of you who voted do indicate that you're focused on paying down debt. And so, yes, we talked about now that interest rates are really low, the cost of your borrowing is lower, right? It provides a good opportunity to take advantage of that and really get in front of paying down your debt. So pretty interesting results there. Thank you for that. So let me just pause for a second and see if there's some things in the chat. So I'd like to know if we are getting the PowerPoint afterwards. So uh, this webinar is being recorded. So the recording of it absolutely will be posted on the resource section of the Oasis website. And someone said, "Can I get the question again?" Oh, sorry. Is that the poll? I closed it already. So I apologize for that. So we'll keep moving forward here. In terms of your goals, right? I think it's important to set goals because it kind of gives you a marker. It gives you something to aim towards. Remember when we looked at getting to your financial independence day? You need to think about that, because if you are not setting goals, then you're really not going to get to where you want to be unless you get lucky, right? But you need to set goals so that it gives you a direction to set, and it gives you a clear path of what you're trying to achieve. And it's not to say that just setting a goal means you're going to achieve it. Of course not. We know life is more complicated than that. But if you have a goal, then as unexpected things happen in your life, you can adjust right here and there so that you can continue to get back on course eventually. And so one of the things that I think are helpful in terms of setting your financial and personal goals is you want to be specific about them. You want to put them down, write them down, have them somewhere that you can look at it so that you can remind yourself and you can keep yourself accountable. But a couple other things too. I mentioned you want to be specific. So what is it? What is the goal and what is the time frame for that goal? So if it's retirement or financial independence, is that in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years in your ideal vision? If your goal is to save up money so that you can travel, where is it that you are hoping to travel to? What is the cost of that? And so that's another important thing. Cost. Each goal that you have is going to have some sort of dollar figure attached to it, right? And so you want to understand what that is. How much is it that you're looking to save for the down payment of your house? How much is it that you need if your goal is to go back to school? What if you have renovations that you want to do in your home? What specific rooms and then how much? So those are the types of things that I think will help you in terms of setting your goals. Assess your current financial position, set realistic and achievable goals. Now we can see how can you start to march towards achieving those goals. And now it's really important to understand another helpful tool, your cash flow, right? Or put it another way, the cost of your current lifestyle. We want to know what that is. And so this is about tracking and being aware of the cost of your lifestyle. And this slide is showing you that there are different ways to do that, right? You can use online resources. If you use online banking, I think many of them now In particular, Bank of Montreal does, Royal Bank does. They have on your online banking, these really cool tools that help you track where your money is going in terms of your spending. And so you're able to see in a given period of time how much you're spending on groceries, how much you're spending on personal care or shopping or health care or housing. Okay. Of course, you can always set up your own spreadsheet, and you can use some budget templates that are out there online. One of them is from the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, the FCAC. So what I'll do, those of you who are interested, I'll remind you again once we get to the end and I show you the email address that you can use to send me follow-up questions. But those of you who are interested, I can share with you the FCAC budget template, send you a link for that, and also another really cool budget cash flow tracker that uses Microsoft Excel. So it's a already pre-built spreadsheet that you can use for your own tracking. So I'll remind you again, those of you at the end who are interested and want those resources, you can send me an email and I'll show you the email address once we get to the end. So, of course, what are we doing here with our expenses? Well, you want to be aware of it and you want to add them up. You want to see what's going on in terms of the spending in your life. And so, we understand very quickly that we have some expenses that are sort of fixed, that are happening, every month, same amount for, mortgage or your bills, relatively, very closely, food costs. So these are your ongoing sort of fixed costs. And then we have some expenses that are more random or infrequent, here and there. We're spending money for clothing or entertainment or children's activities, holidays or vacations. Property taxes, if property taxes are part of your mortgage uh, payment, then certainly I think property taxes would be more in the ongoing column. So if we look at what Winnie and Kelvin are doing in terms of estimating their expenses, they put it down this way. So what are basic expenses? What are discretionary expenses? Just like as we talked about, what are those ones that are, you know, here and there, we're spending money on certain things, and these are the expenses that can change drastically from month to month, from week to week, right? And then also you want to look at if you have money going towards paying down your debt and towards savings. So those are the three ways I would like to categorize your spending. And if we look at this, for many of us, under the basic expenses, we have the big three, right? The three biggest expenses that most Canadian households have are food, housing, and transportation. Those are usually the three biggest expenses for the average Canadian household. And so because of that, it's important to get those right? You want to make good decisions there. You don't want to be living in a house that is too expensive for you to afford, for example. You don't want to be spending too much on transportation, right? And so it helps to take a look and make sure you get these get these decisions correct. So if anything, I think what this exercise will do, if you are tracking your spending, is it gets you to understand, right, that you have to make some choices in life because we have limited means. So you have to prioritize what is more important for you. Limited resources means you got to make some sacrifices. You have to make some trade-offs if you want to inevitably achieve your goals. And so it's very critical, right? It's absolutely critical that you can live within your means. So the goal is that you're tracking your spending. Then you're also aware of what is coming in terms of your household income so that you can take a look and see, okay, in the typical month, is there money left over? Or are we just barely breaking it even? Or is there a deficit in cash? Right? You want to know that answer, because if there's a cash flow deficit that you're having normally, the only way that is happening is because you're increasing your borrowing, right? So if you're spending more than you make, that has to mean that you're plugging that gap by borrowing more. And so you might be noticing your line of credit, your credit card balance going up slowly and slowly and slowly. Well, that could be an indication that you're not living within your means. And so that's why it's important to do this tracking exercise. You want to know what that answer is. Then, of course, the question is, well, what can you do to impact this? If you are just barely breaking even, or you're not living within your means, what can you do, right? And so there's three financial behaviors. I think about the financial behaviors as a way to think about your options in terms of what you can do to impact the situation. So what are those three behaviors? Your earning behavior is the first one. And so that means you're taking a look at the column over here where we're showing you your income. And so think about that. What can you do to impact your earning situation? What can you do to earn more money, right? Maybe there's some things you can do at work, asking for a raise, for example. Or if you if you have opportunities to work overtime, maybe that's another thing to consider. Perhaps you have hobbies or interests that are outside of work that you can maybe use to explore to get some money coming in. Doesn't even have to be regular income coming in from another source, like a part-time, second part-time job. Not everybody's going to be able to, based on their circumstances, to be able to do that. But maybe it's a hobby or interest that allows you to get money coming in periodically here and there. Who knows what that could be, right? So that's your earning behavior. Then there's your spending behavior, and that's the column in the middle where we're analyzing what we just looked at, analyzing the cost of your lifestyle and where you're actually spending your money. So how much are you spending on housing, your utilities, food, transportation, entertainments, subscriptions, and so on and so forth. So that you can look at the third behavior, which is the sacrificing behavior. So that you can say, okay, given my income situation, given what we're spending money on, are there changes that I can make to this situation here in terms of our spending, for example, where I can cut or reduce spending in certain areas or for certain categories? So it's about choices, right? And that's what the sacrificing behavior really is about. And now maybe we can look at a couple tips to help you along with that type of analysis, right? So if we're thinking about, okay, what can we cut in terms of our lifestyle spending? And so we talked about the big three, right? Food, housing, transportation. Well, with food, one of the tips that a lot of people have is to plan your meals. Plan your meals at the beginning of the week so that then when you go grocery shopping, you're only buying those items on the menu for the week. The other thing, of course, you can do is once you've planned your meals and you know what you want to get, then you can look out for those items throughout the week as they go on sale and only buy what's on sale if you can, right? Another thing is if maybe you're eating out a lot, well, maybe you're not going to the restaurant right now, given what's going on with the pandemic, but maybe you're ordering in a lot and you're not really cooking that much. See if you can start to learn to cook. Or it might even be a good idea for you to look at these meal services that are out there. You might not end up saving that much money compared to what you're spending out and dining out, but at least now you're preparing the meals yourself. You're starting to compile the um, um, what do we call it, recipe list, and then eventually you can say, okay, I can start to do some of these things on my own. I can start to pick up these groceries on my own, and then you can transition away from that. Take a look at what you're spending in terms of your communication services, right? You have a streaming service for movies and videos. Maybe you're also looking at music. So again, it's about reviewing the usage of these, taking a look what you're spending to make sure that you're getting good value out of it. Maybe there's some subscriptions that you're not really making use of anymore. Those are easy things to just cut off and then save money there. Again, so shopping, clothing. Now that we're getting close to Christmas time, you can include buying gifts on here. And so there's maybe some things you can do in terms of upcoming gift buying for family members and friends that doesn't involve you spending money on stuff. Maybe you can help them out by, cooking dinner for them for one night so that they get a break. Another thing you can do if they have kids, offer to babysit their kids so that they get a night free of, having to clean up and cook and run and chase around their kids. So, these are just some little ideas where you can still do something nice for somebody without having to go and buy some stuff for them. You know, transportation, that's another one of our big expenses. If you are working from home more now than you have before, is there an opportunity for you to get in touch with your vehicle insurer and talk about reducing your premiums because you're not driving as much anymore? We know that this was something that people were doing at the beginning part of the pandemic. If you haven't done this already, that's an easy thing to do. Just call up your vehicle insurer and see if you can save some money on your premiums if you're not driving as much anymore because you're working more from home. So these are just some ideas. There's lots more that are out there if you want to do some research that can help you reduce those expenses in your cost of your lifestyle so that you can start to more easily live within your means. A couple other easy tips, so put controls in your spending. So if you are someone who is good with a disciplined budget, I know a lot of people budgets don't work because it's hard to have that discipline to only stick to spending X amount of dollars. But if you do have that discipline, it's good. So what is it? Is it $200 of spending money and that's it for the week? If you spend that, you don't go back to the bank machine and take out any more. What about impulse spending? So if you're somebody who has a difficulty with impulse spending, and so one of the tips we looked at earlier in terms of groceries is, if you plan your meals at the beginning of the week and only get what's on that menu, it can help with the impulse spending. But this is another really interesting exercise, and it's just getting you to understand that money itself does not really have any intrinsic value, right? Money doesn't have any intrinsic value. It's just what we use to exchange in return for services and products and things that we need. And that decision that you're making in buying or purchasing something or a service, that is a reflection of your values, because you're saying, okay, this particular item or service is important enough to me that I'm willing to part with X amount of dollars. And so if you look at what you're spending your money on, it is going to show you what you think is important or what you value in your life. But what we want to do is keep the spending the money on things that do bring significant value to you in your life, but recognize and analyze where you're spending money on things that do not add a lot of value to you. And those are the areas, the prime areas for cutting them out or stopping them totally. And that's why it's important to track your spending in the first place so that you can see and analyze. All of us do it. I do it too. And so I always try and at least once a year go and look at my spending, because it's easy for us to fall into those bad habits, right? We all do it. So here's this little exercise in terms of impulse buying. So if you see an item, do you want it or do you need it, right? And that's an interesting question. Do you want it or do you need it? Sometimes you might think you need it when it's really you just want it. So if you want it, then do you want it more than a specific goal, right? So if this is an item and you can spend money on this, but you also know, well, listen, I really want to pay off this particular debt, and that's one of my priorities. Do you want this item more than you want that goal? If the answer is no, put that thing back. If the answer is yes, well, then it's a need, right? And does this need have value? So here's where we're doing the assessment of the value of it versus the cost of it. If the need does not have value, put it back, wait for a sale. If it does have value, yes, you can go ahead and buy it. So this is a recognition that, of course, you're going to be spending money on things that are more than just, our bills or housing or heat. There's some interest that you have. There's some fulfillment and joy in your life that some things, some exercises, some pursuits bring to you. Those are important and valuable. You want to make room to be able to spend money on those by cutting out the low value stuff. And so you can only do that once again if you're tracking your spending. Some of us find it easier to spend money with our plastic, tap, boop, very easy. So maybe for you, it'd be better for you to take out cash. Now, let's tackle the debt. First thing we want to do, what are your debts, right? And so if you've updated your net worth statement, take a look at that. What are your debts? How much are you paying in terms of monthly payments? What are the interest rates and borrowing costs on those debts? Because what we want to do is figure out a strategy to paying down all of your debts, but in the most efficient way. And that's what we mean by optimizing your debts. It's important, always important to pay the minimum payments on all of your debts, even as we're going to talk about how you can start to take extra money and target it on one of your debts first. And then once that's paid off, then you go down to the next priority list. But even if you're doing, as you're doing this, you're continuing to make at least the minimum payments on all of your debts. And basically that's what we get by this exercise, in which you eventually almost kind of create a debt snowball, right? And so you start to snowball down your debt by focusing on the number one debt priority. Put as much of your extra money and surplus money on that one as you can. Get that paid down, move on to the next one. So it's like a snowball. It has momentum, and you can get your debt paid off. So we're going to show you an example of this, right? Just to let this hit home a little bit. So let's look at Winnie and Kelvin again. And let's say, okay, Winnie and Kelvin have these three personal debts. They have a credit card from HBC, they have a line of credit, and they have a MasterCard. So the minimum payments you can see there, but they're paying a little bit more than the minimum on all of these, for a total of $600 a month going towards paying each of these, which is good. They're making more than the minimum payments on all of them, which means they're going to be eventually paying them off. But is there a way that we can more efficiently get this all paid off faster, saving you time, saving you interest and borrowing costs? Well, yeah. So what we're going to do is first rearrange the balance on the debts to take advantage of the room, specifically on the line of credit, because the line of credit actually has the lowest interest rate. Aha. So in this situation, max out the line of credit by shifting money from the HBC card, which has the highest interest rate, and putting it to the line of credit. And also taking from the HBC card and putting a little bit on the MasterCard, which is still high in terms of interest, but it's lower than the HBC card. So now you've rearranged the balances, okay? And now what we're going to do is make your minimum payments on the line of credit and the MasterCard only, and then all of that extra money is going to be going onto the HBC credit card. And so you see $423 a month now is going to be going on the credit card from HBC, and then minimum payments on the rest. So this is what happens. That HBC card, because we're making those extra payments and we shifted a lot of the balance off of it, is now paid off in 6 months. That 6th month, when it's paid off, you shift all of the money you're paying on the HBC card onto the MasterCard. And very quickly, that MasterCard is paid off. And now you're only left with the line of credit. All of the money, $600 a month, focusing on the line of credit, it gets paid off quickly too. So you are on track, or Winnie and Kelvin were on track to paying off all of their debt the old way. But this way is actually going to save them time and money. So the total interest paid is $3,500 approximately. Without snowballing the debt this way, that total interest would have been $6,500. So they've saved $3,000 in interest, half of interest costs they've saved by doing this particular strategy. Okay. So that's to help you with paying off your personal debt. Of course, you may also have other things too, like a mortgage. And so I think we should address mortgages. Mortgages, the interest rates are much lower than other personal debts like line of credit, loans, car loans, credit cards. So it's not to say that you also don't want to be paying off the mortgage quicker than otherwise, because it's the same idea. If you can pay it off faster, you're going to save money and interest, you're going to save time. And so one of the things you can do is just by changing your payment frequency on your mortgage. Instead of making monthly mortgage payments, you can switch to bi-weekly mortgage payments. Especially if your income, your paycheck comes bi-weekly, then I think you want to try and match it so that as soon as you get paid, you're making a mortgage payment. Switching from monthly to bi-weekly is going to save you money in the long run, because essentially you're going to be making one extra monthly mortgage payment a year if you switch from monthly to bi-weekly, because at least twice a year there's going to be a month where you actually end up making 3 bi-weekly payments. So that will happen twice a year. And so that in effect gives you an extra monthly mortgage payment that you're paying into your mortgage, which is going to allow you to pay your principal faster and save in interest. Then, of course, you might want to check with your lender to see what your prepayment privileges are. So take a look at your mortgage contract. It could be that once a year you're able to pay 15% of the original mortgage value as a lump sum payment, which will go directly to the principal of the mortgage, which will save you in the long run in your interest costs. Same idea in terms of increasing your monthly payments. Goes right towards the principal, the extra monthly payment that you're making. All right. So as we wrap up, what are the key takeaways? Well, I think we talked about the first step, which is add it up. Take a look at your current financial position. And once you've done that, which is your net worth statement, right? And you're analyzing what your biggest assets are, what your biggest debt are, where they're heavily concentrated in those areas. And then you're looking at, in terms of your assets, which one is most easily convertible to cash, which is liquidity. And then with your debts, taking a look at your monthly payments and your interest rates so that you can figure out how to optimize your debts and do that debt snowball. And then track your cash flow. Once you're able to track your cash flow, then you can make those important decisions about what valuable spending that you want to maintain and what low value spending you want to get rid of. In terms of reducing that low value spending, well, there's a couple of things you can do. You can just cut a percentage of that expense down, or you can use some controls in place. Like if you are one of those person that is quick to tap, or you're buying a lot of stuff online, give yourself a certain amount of cash each week and don't spend more than that. Think of the 5-second rule. Again, if your impulse buying is an issue for you, buy on sale in terms of your groceries to cut your food costs down. And then the debt snowball. First, we want to optimize the debt, right? So taking a look at your balance and your limits and the interest rate on each debt so that you can shift around the balance to the more optimal situation. And from there, you can start your debt snowball. Pile up as much of your extra money on that highest interest debt, and then move on to the next one and then the next one. In terms of mortgages, you can speed up the process by increasing your payment frequency, increasing the payment amount, use your prepayment privileges. So here we go. Those of you who want to ask follow-up questions, you can use this email address here, which is go@eckler.ca. And I do my best to reply within 24 hours. And again, I'll remind you, if you want a couple resources for budgets and cash flow trackers, do send me an email here and I'll reply to you with those resources. And lastly, a reminder that this webinar has been recorded, and so it should be up in the resource sector section of your website before the end of this week. And so look out for that. So thank you for spending time today. We're now going to take a look at your questions in the chat or the Q&A. I think mostly people were using the chat. So yeah, please appreciate the resources there. I see a comment. Absolutely. So send me an email and I'll be happy to. Another comment is, it's interesting to me that car loans are not in the debt column. Right. So car loans should be, yes. If you have vehicles and you have car loans, absolutely, you'd put it in the debt column there. Um, Thoughts on debt consolidation? Yeah, I think, if debt consolidation makes sense, that's one of the things that certainly you might want to consider because, you know, debt consolidation is kind of like the exercise we looked at in terms of optimizing your debt and the debt snowball. It's really about getting a lot of that high interest debt towards your lowest interest debt. In a lot of cases, when people are using debt consolidation, they're putting, they're refinancing their mortgage, for example, and taking, a line of credit or student loan or some other higher interest debt and putting it on the mortgage. And so something you might want to explore to see if it makes sense for you to do a refinance of your mortgage. There are some costs involved with that, and timing is an issue too. If you're locked into your current mortgage term, you might not want to break up your mortgage to refinance. Um, so you do want to look and see if that is a situation that makes sense, or you just want to get a debt consolidation loan instead of rolling into your mortgage. You can look at a debt consolidation loan, which is similar to the idea of the snowball, right? So now you've put all of your debts into this new loan that hopefully has a much lower interest. And now you just focus on paying off that loan. Don't borrow some more on your other debts. If usually a debt consolidation loan, the bank will require you to close and cut off that credit card that you're consolidating, for example.